It is shocking to me just how divorced some self-described Christians are from the tenets of their supposed faith. Sometimes I wonder if they've even read the book that they purport to pattern their lives on. They don't even seem to know what's in it sometimes. They certainly don't seem to be following what's in it, or sometimes they cherry pick things and take stuff out of context in order to justify what it is that they already believe, but they're certainly not following the spirit of it. They're certainly not following the idea of Christianity per se. Now, just to preface this discussion, I'm not a standard Christian, not a mainstream Christian. I don't really believe in an entity God, one that has a will and preferences and consciousness and that sort of thing. The God that I believe in is much closer to what Spinoza would describe God as, which is to say it's identical with the universe. I am God and you are God and this room is God and God is everywhere in the universe because God is the universe. And there's some patterning to it, but not in any conscious way. But anyway, the point is I do go to a Christian church. I'm a member of a church of the United Church of Canada, and I've been a member for quite some time. And in fact, tomorrow I'll be delivering a sermon at one of said churches. So I do have a vested interest in Christianity. I'm a fan of the idea of Christianity, but as such I have strong critiques of the Christian church. Many of these critiques echo what Friedrich Nietzsche would critique the Christian church of, which is to say that it can be used to justify passivity in cases of injustice, and it can be used to justify obedience to authority and submission to the will of somebody who doesn't necessarily have your best interests in mind. It can be disempowering to people and basically an anesthetic away from taking any sort of positive action in the world. And as such, I reject those aspects of Christianity, and there are a great number of Christians who do also reject those aspects of it. Unfortunately, the Christian church and the Christian ethos has been, well, it's been distorted. It's been mutilated over the years, having been adopted by various empires and retranslated, reinterpreted, and reformed in such a way as to support the status quo. And what we're seeing in America, what we see with the conservative evangelical church, well, that's a clear-cut example of this very thing. As with any religious doctrine, interpretation is absolutely vital to the whole exercise. You can't just literally read the book and then follow what it says because, well, it was written by Bronze Age people. It's not the Bronze Age anymore, for one. But for another, a lot of it in there is just parable. It's myth. It's allegory. It's something that's not meant to be taken literally. It's meant to be a toolkit, a building box for building humans in a society that is Christian in nature. And as such, you need to be able to unpack that and adopt it willingly as part of your development process in order to actually be a real believer, so to speak. And to be a rational believer, one needs to be very conscious of this interpretation. One needs to be conscious that one is not looking at this objectively because, well, there is no objectivity. There is no way to read this thing objectively and know exactly what's being meant here. That being said, if you read between the lines, if you take it considered as a whole, as a collection of stories, as a collection of rules and guidelines to be followed to run a decent society, there are certain themes. You're able to pick out the themes that generate the Christian ethos that aren't necessarily always written explicitly, but you can definitely tell that they're there. And it appears over and over in the Bible, especially in the New Testament, that Jesus is constantly saying that you should be looking to the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. Because yes, if you look at the letter of the law, then it can never change. You can never actually adapt your law to meet the new world around you. And as such, you're stuck with these like Bronze Age laws about society and social norms that are actually kind of abhorrent to people who now don't have to commit infanticide when there's a famine or any of those other nasty things that people had to do that was just like, the way it was. But even speaking as like an atheist, technically, even if one were to completely reject Christianity, even if one were to read the Bible and be like, no, this is total bullshit, throw it out, if you follow the rules of what's contained in that book and you analyze the behavior of this conservative evangelical Christians, it is not congruent. It does not actually match. In fact, the imminent critique that we're making here implicates those conservative evangelicals by the very rules that are being laid down that they claim to follow. Take, for example, this golden calf of a Donald Trump statue that showed up at the conservative conference this past week. Like, there's a prohibition in the book of Exodus, it's like the second book in the Bible, against building idols. And that's an idol. That's definitely an idol. They're worshiping this man, and by extension, they're worshiping this statue as a symbol of the man. And there's very clear rules against this. There's very good reasons for clear rules against this as well, because, well, this is a form of blasphemy. It's a form of taking God's name in vain. And one of the distortions, one of the perversions of the Christian doctrine is transforming this idea of taking God's name in vain as meaning swearing or like saying God damn it or something like that. That's not what taking God's name in vain means. Taking God's name in vain means to purport to speak for God, speaking with God's voice or saying what God wants, or pretending to have God's ear, having God on your side. It doesn't work that way. Even for somebody who does believe in an entity God, somebody who claims that God has a mind and a will and desires and wants things for his or her people, that's not the way that any reasonable person who follows this faith thinks of God. God does not choose messengers that they're on the side of. God just is. God just wants the best for everyone. God is all loving and all caring, and that's the kind of God that I follow at the very least. And just to put it bluntly, these people are hypocrites. They're absolute charlatans. They've completely ignored both the letter and the spirit of the law that's laid down in this book. They claim up and down to be Christians, good Bible-faring Christian people, and doing what's right for God, but they're ignoring all the stuff about loving thy neighbor. They're ignoring all the stuff about being generous, being charitable, being lovingly caring to the generalized other. Because that's the whole point of Christianity, is to love thy neighbor as thyself and love the God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind. And like, love is the matter. Love is the entire point of this entire religion. But these folks are not doing that thing. Like, take this Republican mayor of a city in Colorado who is talking about, like, don't expect the government to come and bail you out and give you handouts or whatever. And he's talking about, like, take care of yourself. Be part of the solution, not the problem. Don't expect other people to come to your aid. And, like, every man for himself is basically the implication here, where you don't have any responsibility to anybody else and nobody has a responsibility to you. It's a perfectly cynical world, perfectly toxically individualistic world, a world where nobody helps one another and nobody should help one another. Well, that's completely opposite to what's being told to you by your faith, your supposed faith. And if you've been paying attention in Sunday school, that does not mesh, that does not grok with what you're being told there. Take, for example, also this fucking Ted Cruz guy who suddenly his house is cold because, it's snowing in Texas. And this is legitimately like a humanitarian disaster. And he, who is senator of Texas, supposedly a leader in this time of crisis, just fucks off to Mexico. Just heads to a resort in Cancun. Because, like, personally, he's being inconvenienced. So therefore, he's just going to go toddle off. Because, well, he has the resources. He's rich enough to be able to do that. And, well, he can do whatever he wants because he's an individual and it's a free country and he doesn't have any responsibility to anybody else. So therefore, he has the right. He has every right to go and screw off to Mexico if he wants to. Obviously, that's not in that book either. You don't run away from a humanitarian crisis. You sell your shirt and you give the proceeds to the poor. That's in that book. The guy with the long hair and the beard, supposedly, he said that. He literally said that, if you believe this Bible. But somehow he's ignoring it. There's this general attitude towards total individualism to a toxic degree, where rather than pooling our resources, cooperating, working together, you saw this incredible surge of panic because the people who were facing this humanitarian disaster, rather than just pooling your resources, cooperating, coordinating your resources, and be able to deal with this together, people were incredibly concerned about their own needs. And so they overbuy in supplies that they didn't actually even need. They were panicking because they thought that if they didn't buy everything they could, then everybody else would buy everything that they could. And they're not entirely wrong about that because everybody's got this same idea in mind. And then there's nothing left for anyone. There's a shortage created by people overbuying because they're panicking because they think that everybody else has cynical motives and is unwilling to cooperate with them. It's like a society-wide prisoner's dilemma, and everybody is choosing to defect 100% of the time. And yes, I'm making a broad generalization here because there are good people, and yes, there are quite a few good people who are self-described Christians, and even some good people who are self-described conservative evangelicals. But it's contrary to their dominant rules to be a good Christian and a conservative evangelical. The two are not compatible. And in the state of hyper-individualistic atomization, it becomes much, much easier for these hypocritic charlatans to gain power. Because if you're not really cooperating, you're not really working together with your neighbor, you're not really able to notice when somebody's trying to take advantage of you. Because you're busy just watching out for your neighbor, making sure that they're not stealing your stuff and making sure that everybody's playing fair, but you're not as concerned then. You don't have enough attention to be able to pay attention when somebody's trying to sell you a bill of goods, pull the wool over your eyes. Take the former governor Rick Scott, who is claiming that the people of Texas would rather suffer a few hours or days without heat than face government regulation. When, like, speak for your fucking self, bro. Like, the people in Texas who are without heat, they're not so concerned about government regulation. They're concerned that their power's off. Some of them are still off. Their heat's gone. Their pipes are freezing. They don't have clean drinking water. That's what they care about. And yeah, some people are so deluded by this ideology. They've been so taken by it that they are proud of the fact that they're without heat and without water, and just to stick it to the man, this abstract notion of the man who is making their lives difficult, when actually what this regulation is doing is protecting the power supply, making sure that the companies responsible for ensuring critical infrastructure are making the necessary upgrades to be able to withstand, a freak snowstorm in Texas. It's just yet another example of basically taking God's name in vain. It's the same functional practice, the same technique is being executed here, but it's in a slightly different form. And this is everywhere. This has been a problem throughout history. It's not a new phenomenon. There's always been these heretical distortions of Christianity because it's basically been turned into a brand name. It's the brand of Christianity that guides a lot of this ideologically motivated combat that distorts the beliefs of Christianity to serve a political end. It's the same thing that gave you the divine right of kings in the feudal age, the same thing that supports various empires throughout history because, well, God's on our side. We're the Holy Roman Empire. When they're neither holy nor Roman nor even an empire, really. Christianity, like any other faith, is basically a cultural narrative. It's a way to be able to structure your reality, structure the way that you set your norms and the values of your society so that you can learn how to co-create your reality with other people within that society. And, well, like any other cultural narrative, it's vulnerable to manipulation, vulnerable to people in power, people who have the ability to set that agenda, set that narrative, to be able to include or exclude anything they damn well want to. And yeah, you've got the option of opening up the book yourself, having a look at it, and, hey, hang on a second here, this isn't right. But the people that are in charge of your church, in charge of your community, in charge of your country, well, they're trying to push this other distorted version of it. And that has the effect of making one question one's own judgment. If one is reading in the book something that's contrary to what the governor or the president is saying, well, you're going to believe the guy that's telling you what to believe, especially if they have some sort of formal title, especially if, like, the priest is telling you. And, like, this is how you end up with child abuse among the priesthood. You get these children being taken advantage of by this guy with a formal title and authority based on what God wants, again, taking God's name in vain. And so they're able to exercise that power over the narrative to convince people to do something that's going to make them vulnerable, going to victimize them. And there are warnings, there's precautions, there's even functions in the doctrine itself against this sort of thing. There's passages in there that warn you against stuff like golden idols, that warn you against stuff like taking the Lord's name in vain, that warn you against public professions of faith, that sort of thing. And if you pay attention to those things, they proscribe against a lot of the actions of these evangelical megapastors, of the politicians that claim to be Christians publicly in order to garner the support of the Christian community, all those other sorts of things. It's perversion, it's an abuse, it's violence against a narrative, violence against a great mass of people. And it's not right. It's unjust. It's heresy. It's blasphemy. Shouldn't be stood for. So, I mean, if you are a Christian, that's cool. Like, I hang out with Christians all the time. I think that's great. You have to inspect, though, what kind of Christian you are, what kind of Christianity you are. Because there are nasty Christians, or at least nasty people who call themselves Christians. But if you're actually doing the Christian thing, well, you don't have to be a Christian to do that. Like, some of the most Christian people I have ever met are self-described atheists, self-described Hindus, self-described Muslims. There are kind people of every faith group and of no faith group. It's independent of what brand you follow. It's about being a good person, having universal love, having care for the generalized other, and just, working towards a better world, what the Christians would consider the kingdom of God. Anyway, tomorrow I'm actually preaching at a church. I attend the United Church of Canada, and so I'm delivering a sermon at my church. So I'll be posting it here, and I hope you'll find it interesting. So I do these videos daily, and if you like this content, if you could like the thing, that'd be great. Algorithmic things, blah, blah, blah. I'll cut it short. So thanks for listening. I hope I don't get hung up on a cross for this, and I'll see you tomorrow.